Daniel Dubois is a 14-0 British heavyweight prospect. His best win was over fellow prospect and stablemate Nathan Gorman, who he stopped. Dubois isn't currently ranked in the top 10 of any of the major sanctioning bodies other than the WBO, who inexplicably have seen fit to give him a number 3 ranking. Now, this is commonplace in boxing, where certain fighters get rankings which they don't deserve or haven't earned. But this particular instance is especially outrageous when you consider the fact that most of the people below Dubois in the rankings have beaten much better opponents, much more proven guys than the likes of Nathan Gorman. So, for example, Adam Kownacki has wins over Gerald Washington, Artur Szpilka, Chris Arreola. Andy Ruiz, a former world champion, has got a win over Anthony Joshua. Michael Hunter has got victories over people like Martin Bakole and Sergey Kuzmin. Derek Chisora has got victories over people like Carlos Takam. Joe Joyce has got a victory over Bryant Jennings. Philip Hrgovic has got a victory over former world title challenger, 2-time former world title challenger, let me correct myself, Eric Molina. So these guys have all beaten more proven fighters than Nathan Gorman. How on earth, and some of them have done it recently in the last year or so. So how on earth has Daniel Dubois been installed in at number 3? Well, most of you are aware that in boxing, rankings have got less to do with merit and more to do with politics. Frank Warren, who is Daniel Dubois' promoter, has had a very, very close and cozy relationship with the WBO for many, many years. Since their inception, in fact, Frank Warren actually helped the WBO get on their feet when most of the boxing world didn't take them seriously as a sanctioning body. Frank Warren did take them seriously. And many of Frank Warren's fighters during the 1990s were fighting for the WBO belt. So that, I would strongly suggest, is the reason, and pretty much the sole reason, why Daniel Dubois has been afforded such a lofty ranking after beating what somebody in my boxing group described as a Japanese waiter in his last fight. So yeah, outrageous stuff. But hey, it happens all the time in boxing. I mean, Canelo Alvarez got a shot at a vacant WBC light middleweight title against Matthew Hatton. That's one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen. Somebody recently in my boxing group pointed out that when Anthony Joshua got his shot against Charles Martin, he was ranked too highly based upon what he'd achieved at the time. And I would agree with that, but it's not as outrageous as Dubois' current ranking. I mean, these are the rankings at the time when AJ challenged Charles Martin. AJ was the number 4 contender. And the reason it's not as outrageous as what we see with Dubois right now is because if you look at the people below AJ in the rankings at the time, most of them hadn't beaten anybody any better than Dylan White, because that was AJ's best win at the time. He was coming off the knockout victory over Dylan White. Most of them hadn't beaten anybody any better than Dylan White. Certainly not in the past year or so, because of course rankings are updated based upon what you've done lately. And you look at the guys below him, Carlos Takam maybe could have a grievance for being ranked below Joshua, but Joseph Parker hadn't done anything at that point, so he can't really grumble at being ranked below Joshua at the time. Neither could Glaskov. Kubrat Pulev maybe, but again, he'd been fighting cream puffs since his loss to Vladimir Klitschko. So even he beat a few guys like Dimitrenko when he was still fairly decent, and he beat Ustinov. But other than that, he really hadn't done anything at the time, so can't grumble that much for being ranked below AJ. Derek Chisora, of course, was always an up-and-down fighter. Andy Ruiz Jr. hadn't beaten anybody any better than AJ had beaten at the time. Berman Stavern, he was a former world champion. Maybe he could grumble at AJ being ranked higher. But again, Stavern, coming off the loss to Deontay Wilder, was very inactive. Robert Helenius, I mean, he did beat former world champion Sam Peter, although he was way over the hill. I can't remember if Helenius was coming off a loss at this point here in 2016. David Haye, of course, had come back and had those 2 awful fights against Jurjai and Mark Damori. And obviously he'd been out the ring for 4 years other than those fights. So you can understand why David Haye was ranked so low. Dominic Brazil hadn't done anything any more than Anthony Joshua at the time, nor Jarrell Miller. So although there are some fighters below AJ in the rankings at the time who had maybe beaten better fighters than Dillian Whyte. And again, Dillian Whyte has gone on to prove himself to be a very good contender. But at that time, Dillian Whyte was an obscure prospect. So that's the context that we have to view this in. But nonetheless, yeah, AJ maybe didn't deserve a number 4 ranking with the IBF. But still, not as outrageous as what we see with Daniel Dubois today when you consider the individuals below him. I mean, we've got a guy who was just world heavyweight champion last year in Andy Ruiz below Daniel Dubois. People, that's outrageous. We've got Michael Hunter, who's beaten people like Bacoli, who had a draw with Povetkin, who beat Kuzmin, and he's ranked below Dubois? How's that possible? Joe Joyce, even though he's, again, a prospect like Dubois, he at least beat Bryant Jennings in his last fight. So an outrageous ranking that Daniel Dubois, I hope I didn't say IBF rank. Well, AJ was talking about the AJ IBF rankings, the WBO rankings here. Outrageous ranking for Daniel Dubois, but that's all down to Frank Warren's very cozy relationship with them, you know. And I hope Daniel Dubois isn't going to go down the same road as Anthony Yarde, whereby he skips past intermediary fights and jumps straight in at world level before he's ready. I hope he don't do that. I know that Anthony Yarde was managed and still is, as far as I'm aware, by Tunde Ajayi. Daniel Dubois, I believe, is managed and trained by Martin Bowers. I hope Martin Bowers can put enough pressure on Frank Warren, do whatever they have to do to get Dubois some intermediary fights before they step him up and put him in there with a legitimate world level fighter. Now, they might be able to, you know, cherry pick a certain fighter out of the top 10, top 15, who they could put him in there with. But again, that's not preparing him. That's what they did with Yarde. They were picking people who were technically in the top 15 or whatever of the WBO, but they were the weakest possible people you could find, obscure fighters. If they're going to put Daniel Dubois in against somebody like that, that's not going to prepare him for when he actually fights a legit guy in the top 10, top 15. You know, we don't want there to be a massive leap between the level of competition he's been fighting and then world level. Because as we saw with Anthony Yarde, even though he put up a valiant effort against Sergey Kovalev, he fell short. And you do wonder whether he could have actually won that fight if he'd had the necessary intermediary fights to prepare him better, give him the experience of going, you know, long in a tough contest. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And again, not singling out Daniel Dubois. This is commonplace in boxing. Certain promoters have got cozy relationships with certain sanctioning bodies. There was a time when the IBF seemed to be very cozy with Matchroom. WBO have been cozy with Frank Warren for a long time, and they're also very cozy with Bob Arum. The WBC, as we all know, are very cozy with Al Heyman and the PBC. So we get it. Politics. But this is a particularly outrageous instance of it happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about all the points I've raised in this video. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.